The rumor slipped through the hushed corridors of Los Angeles Memorial like a venomous whisper, and within hours it had ignited every vortex of suspicion, every spark of outrage, until the entire Spencer Finnegan Forrester axis of power was ensnared in a storm of accusation. Finn Finnegan, the compassionate, steady-handed surgeon who had once been hailed as the very embodiment of medical integrity, was alleged to have discovered that Luna Nozawa had conspired with Sheila Carter to sabotage his own daughter's surgery, and in a moment of unforgivable rage, had deliberately shortened the interval between defibrillator shocks, ensuring that the life-saving procedure would fail. No one could recall a rumor so incendiary in recent memory, and the consequences rippled instantly through the fractured alliances of this tight-knit community. Word reached Poppy Nozawa while she sat in the austere conference room of the hospital, still raw from her daughter's death, and she erupted with a fury that stunned everyone present. She demanded an immediate, fully independent autopsy on Luna's body, refusing to trust the very physicians who had delivered the initial, sanitized report. Poppy's eyes blazed when she spoke, her voice like steel. "If there's one shred of truth to this slander, I want it exposed. I want an autopsy by someone with no ties to the Finnegans or the Spencers. I want toxicology, histology, every test from here to the state lab. I want names of pathologists, dates, times, nothing less." Her insistence was met with hurried nods from hospital administrators who recognized both the legal peril and the moral imperative. If the rumor carried any weight, the fallout would engulf the entire institution, risking malpractice suits, criminal charges, and a public relations disaster. Across town at Spencer Publications headquarters, Bill Spencer sat in his mahogany-paneled office, staring at the phone with a fury that crackled through his veins. Within minutes, he had tapped his private detective, a man known for unearthing buried truths in hospital archives, and locked down security systems. "Find me every frame of every camera angle from that operating room," Bill barked into the receiver, date stamped, time stamped, audio if they have it. "If Finn pulled a stunt like that, there will be trace evidence, hesitation, mistimed shocks, a faltering hand. I want proof." He slammed the receiver down and paced the room, his mind racing through scenarios, criminal indictments for attempted murder, a defamation lawsuit to tear Finn's license away, and the spectacle of bringing him to court under a swarm of cameras. Bill was not merely a father in pursuit of justice for his son. He was a media mogul whose instincts demanded absolute clarity, absolute domination of the narrative. Meanwhile, Finn, oblivious at first to the maelstrom gathering around him, wrapped late that evening after reviewing case files on pediatric cardiac anomalies, only to find a message blinking on his secure hospital pager. "Urgent. See me. Dr. Lee Finnegan." His pulse tightened as he hurried to his wife's makeshift office in the Finnegan residence, a space cluttered with surgical journals and children's drawings. Lee closed the door behind him, her face grave. "They're talking," she said, voice thick. "Rumor is swirling that you intentionally shortened the time between defibrillator shocks on Luna's table. Poppy's demanding an independent autopsy. Bill's hiring a detective to pull or footage. They're calling it murder by omission." Finn closed his eyes, a wave of nausea washing over him, and shook his head. "It's impossible," he murmured. "I gave her every chance. I ordered the standard protocol, 3 minutes between shocks. Anything less would have been malpractice." But as the words left his mouth, he knew that in the merciless calculus of revenge, because she killed my daughter, would never justify surgical deviation. Lee placed her hand on his arm. "You have to fight this. We need to get ahead of it." At dawn, while the city still shivered under the haze of pre-rush hour, Poppy Nozawa met with the independent pathologist she had retained. A stern woman whose reputation for impartiality was rivaled only by her surgical brilliance. The examination room smelled of antiseptic and sorrow as Luna's body lay shrouded beneath crisp, white linens. Poppy hovered over the mortuary table, eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and righteous indignation, as the pathologist made careful incisions, removed tissue samples, and jotted notes in a ledger bound by legal seals. Hours later, Poppy insisted on reviewing preliminary slides under a microscope, demanding to see whether Luna's myocardium bore the telltale signs of delayed oxygenation or excessive scarring that might imply a defibrillation protocol gone awry. Meanwhile, Bill's detective descended upon Los Angeles Memorial's security headquarters, a fortress of monitors and tapes. Under the cover of night, he convinced the head of security to grant him emergency clearance, no questions asked, and plugged a portable drive into the main console, downloading gigabytes of surveillance footage. He pored over every angle: the surgeon's station, the anesthesiologist's console, the hallway camera. He froze frame after frame, listening to faint beeps recorded by the OR's integrated sound system, mapping exactly when energy pulses should have occurred. He marked potential discrepancies. A final shock administered 2 minutes before the mandated time, a barely perceptible pause in the anesthesiologist's watch, the moment when Finn's hand trembled as he raised the paddles above Luna's chest. Each anomaly was a hook, and by sunrise he had delivered a dossier to Bill that gleamed with the promise of courtroom drama. Word of the scandal spread through gossip channels like wildfire. At Forrester Creations, Steffy Forrester, still shaken by the chain of tragedies unfolding around her, found herself cornered in her design studio by Hope Logan, whose wide eyes betrayed her own alarm. "Have you heard?" Hope whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "They're saying Finn's sabotaged Luna's surgery on purpose. Poppy's going ballistic, and Bill's already got someone going through every second of tape." Steffy's hand flew to her heart. "It's insane," she said, voice low. "He loves his daughter more than anything. He would never, he couldn't." But even as the words formed, doubt gnawed at her. For nights she had seen Finn emerge from the oar, his scrub cap crooked, his gaze haunted, and now the haunting took on a darker hue. Creations was a palace of glamour, but under its gilded facade, tension coiled like a serpent ready to strike. Boardroom whispers turned to fervent speculation, interns peeking at senior designers as they exchanged frantic text messages. Pressure mounted for Ridge Forrester to intervene, pressure mounted on Bill Spencer to reveal his evidence. At each turn, the families that once celebrated weddings and christenings together now orbited separate orbits of distrust. Finn, isolated in his guilt and panic, could find no sanctuary in the hospital's chapel or his own home. Lee insisted he surrender a voluntary statement to the hospital's ethics committee, but Finn balked, fearful that any misstep would be used to convict him in the court of public opinion. Instead, he chose to consult his own attorney, a shrewd former prosecutor who began drafting a preemptive lawsuit for defamation, insisting that Finn's reputation as a healer could be legally protected even as the rumor mill turned his life inside out. On the third day of this relentless assault, Poppy emerged from the pathology lab with the preliminary report clutched in her hand, her face a mask of triumph. She stormed into the Spencer family's private wing, where Bill and Liam were meeting with a cadre of lawyers, and slammed the file onto the polished cherrywood table. There was no deviation from standard defibrillation protocol, she declared, voice ringing with authority. Histology shows uniform reperfusion injury consistent with accepted timing intervals. No sign of intentional malpractice. Bill's jaw clenched, and Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. But Poppy wasn't finished. However, she continued, we did find tissue degradation consistent with a sophisticated adhesive residue near the central line, suggesting someone tampered with the catheter to delay drug delivery. We need to look beyond Finn's hands. The room erupted in chaos once more. Liam bolted upright, shouting for an explanation. Bill slammed his fist against the table, furious that his precious camera footage might have been a red herring. Lawyers scribbled frantic notes. For a moment, the idea of Finn's guilt seemed to vanish, Replaced by the horror of a new betrayal, someone had gone to even greater lengths to ensure Luna's demise. Who else could have had access to Luna's room? Sheila Carter, recently reinstated to the hospital's volunteer roster, a disgruntled lab technician bribed by outside interests? The very conspiracies Finn had once feared were now blooming into a labyrinth of questions with no clear exit. As the Spencer mansion's marble floors echoed with the clatter of urgent footsteps, Finn and Lee, reunited in their own crisis, embraced in the hallway outside the legal antechamber. Their grief and relief tangled in the hushed space between them, a fragile solace against the storm that still churned. "We don't know who did this," Lee whispered, burying her face in his scrubs. "But we'll find out. Together." In the shadow of the hospital, Poppy dialed a number on her cell, Sheila's direct line. Her tone icy. "I've cleared Finn," she said. "Your games are over. If you have any shred of decency left, come clean. Otherwise I will expose you, not just to the authorities, but to the world." On the other end, Sheila's laughter crackled through the speaker, a low, triumphant melody that promised the war was just beginning. And as the rumor that had once cast Finn as a villain collapsed under the weight of Poppy's autopsy report, a darker truth emerged. That in a world where every secret was a weapon and every heartbeat a potential fault line, trust was the most perilous thing of all, and redemption remained as elusive as the next rumor waiting to blow their lives apart. Poppy's decision to press charges against Finn came like a thunderclap in the courtroom, shattering every remaining illusion of safety and solidarity that the Spencer and Finnegan clans had clung to. Armed with the damning report from her independent pathologist and the covert detective's synthesized footage, which she deftly spun to highlight an apparent hesitation on Finn's part before delivering the final shock, Poppy strode into the district attorney's office and demanded that Finn be prosecuted for the death of his daughter, Luna. She insisted that the slight shortening of the defibrillation interval, combined with the alleged adhesive tampering near the central line, constituted a deliberate act of medical homicide, a betrayal so heinous that only prison would suffice to balance the scales of justice. The DA, wary of the explosive publicity such a case would guarantee, nonetheless found Poppy's evidence convincing enough to convene a grand jury. Under the searing glare of television lights, Poppy's reputation as a grieving mother lent her an unassailable moral authority, her teary yet resolute testimony, in which she described every sleepless night and every moment of unbearable pain since Luna's death, pierced the heart of every juror. Finn's defense, led by a high-powered attorney retained by Bill Spencer at great expense, argued fiercely that the standard protocol had been followed, that any fleeting deviations were inadvertent and within the margin of medical error, and that no empirical data supported the notion of intentional malice. But Poppy countered with side-by-side time codes, biometric readouts, and excerpts from Luna's final voicemail, where she admitted to plotting revenge against Bill by endangering his son. Insisting that the true villain was her granddaughter, but that by shortening the period between shocks, Finn had crossed an ethical line that directly led to Luna's demise. When the jury returned a rare indictment for involuntary manslaughter, the shockwaves reverberated through every strata of Los Angeles society. Finn, handcuffed but composed, stood in stunned silence as the bailiff read the charges. 1 count of involuntary manslaughter and 1 count of medical negligence resulting in death. Bill Spencer, who had once extolled his son-in-law as a paragon of virtue, was forced to watch from the gallery as his savings vanished in legal retainers and as headlines blared about the surgeon who killed his own daughter. Steffy, clad in black, fought back tears behind tinted courtroom windows while he gripped her husband's hand through the bars, promising him that she would fight for his freedom. But the judge, swayed by Poppy's portrayal of a father's rage unleashed upon the very child he professed to love, denied bail, declaring Finn a flight risk whose medical expertise could threaten other lives if he were free. And so Finn was led away in shackles to the men's county jail, his white coat replaced by an orange jumpsuit, the corridors echoing with the clang of metal doors as the man who had once held life in his hands found himself powerless, confined, and utterly alone. Inside his cell, the weight of accusations and the burden of perceived guilt collided with Finn's conscience in a devastating tempest. He refused meals, his eyes hollow hollows in a haunted visage as visions of Luna's frail form flickered behind his lids. In the darkness of the infirmary, he wept uncontrollably, his stethoscope still draped around his neck as if it were a cruel reminder of a vocation now stained with tragedy. At night, he dreamt of the ore. The sterile lights becoming a blinding spotlight that revealed not his skill but his failure, the defibrillator paddles growing impossibly heavy in his hands, the monitors beeping an accusatory rhythm that quickened into a death knell. Ganglia of guilt sprouted in his mind, twisting his thoughts until he could no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. He lashed out at guards in a panic when they approached to take his vitals, convinced they were medical examiners there to record his errors for posterity. He scribbled incoherent notes on scraps of toilet paper, recounting every detail of Luna's surgery in a fevered attempt to exonerate himself, and in the process undermined his own sanity. Reports from the jail's psychiatric unit filtered back to Lee. Finn was unresponsive, sometimes catatonic, other times pacing his cell, ranting to empty air about a daughter who haunted every corner of his dreams. He insisted that he had done everything to save Luna, that the slight time variance had been accidental, born of split-second judgment calls made in the crucible of crisis, and yet guilt strangled his words before they could find an audience. Lee, desperate and distraught, reached out to Steffy, Hope Carter, even to Sheila Carter. Despite her own complicated history, to plead for help. The Spencer family, sensing the tide of public sympathy shifting toward the portrait of a broken man, mobilized their resources in a bid to secure a psychiatric diversion program rather than a criminal conviction. Lawyers filed motions based on Finn's mental health assessments, arguing that his psychological collapse made him unfit for incarceration and that he required inpatient psychiatric treatment to address his acute distress and potential harm to others, or to himself. Meanwhile, Poppy Nozawa, undeterred by whispers that her pursuit of justice had tipped into vengeance, held press conferences where she recounted Luna's untimely death and painted Finn as a callous surgeon whose momentary lapse had cost an innocent life. Her voice, measured and unwavering, resonated with the collective outrage of a city that demanded accountability, even as critics argued that Poppy had weaponized her pain to destroy a man whose heartbreak was no less profound than her own. Under the flashbulbs, Poppy declared, "My daughter's life deserves more than an apology. It deserves a reckoning. If that means Finn spends the rest of his days behind bars, so be it." Inside the psychiatric ward, Finn's condition oscillated between lucid despair and manic confessions. One day, he would apologize profusely to visiting guards for taking up space meant for more deserving souls. The next, he would curse the universe for letting Luna suffer under his watch, claiming he would give anything to undo those final moments. He refused medication at first, fearing that antipsychotics would further muddy his memories of that fateful surgery, and instead convulsed in tears, his sobs racking the sterile white room of the ward's common area. Steffi visited him under guard, her designer handkerchief damp with tears as she held his trembling hands. "Finn," she whispered, voice breaking, "you're not alone. You're not a murderer. We'll prove it. I swear it." He looked up at her, eyes glazed with fear and guilt, and murmured, "I killed her, Steffi. My own daughter." Those words echoed through the ward like a curse, drawing the attention of doctors who noted the severity of his delusions and the risk he posed to himself. Soon, the court was presented with psychiatric evaluations declaring Finn incompetent to stand trial. The prosecutor, confronted with a defense that hinged on mental incapacity, reluctantly agreed to postpone criminal proceedings and allow Finn to enter a state-funded psychiatric facility for stabilization. Yet Poppy, furious at what she called another maneuver to evade justice, vowed to appeal the ruling, mobilizing civic activists and high-profile attorneys to challenge the notion that Finn's torment absolved him of responsibility. As the battle lines between legal definitions of culpability and human definitions of compassion hardened, Finn was transferred from the county jail to a locked psychiatric hospital, its corridors echoing with the sobs of broken souls. There, he underwent electroconvulsive therapy, mood stabilizers, and hours of talk therapy, each session peeling back layers of trauma until he could confront the truth of his actions without collapsing under the weight of himself. But the sessions also dredged up memories of Luna's fleeting smiles, her childish laughter in the hospital courtyard, and the moment her chest stopped rising under his watch, each recollection a dagger to his psyche. In the meantime, Lee and Steffy formed an unlikely alliance with Hope and even with Poppy's estranged sister, petitioning the governor for clemency and raising public awareness about the complexities of grief-driven negligence versus premeditated harm. They held vigils outside the psychiatric hospital, candlelight flickering against placards reading "Healing Over Hate" and "Save Finn, Save Our Family," while tabloids splashed headlines proclaiming "Doctor's Breakdown" and "Family Torn Apart by Grief." Bill Spencer, furious at the toll this crusade had taken on his son and on his media empire, threatened to withdraw all financial support from Poppy unless she ceased her public attacks. A move that echoed through Poppy's political connections and forced her to momentarily temper her rhetoric in private, even as she continued to press her legal team to seek a full psychiatric malpractice investigation into Luna's death. In the silent hours, Finn lay in a pale hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they held the answers to his plight. He drew patterns in the condensation on the window, tracing the arc of Luna's life, from her first cry to her final breath, and wondered whether redemption was possible for a father whose hands had betrayed his.